Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Earthly Headlines. Today we're going to talk about the origins of aquaculture and the rearing of, I guess, more or less domesticated fish, if that makes sense. The history of selectively breeding fish and for whatever it was, for leisure, for the artistic, creative look, I guess, for aesthetics, basically, for the aesthetics of certain carp in particular. And you guys have heard of koi fish. If you know or you don't know, koi fish are a type of carp that came from Western Asia or modern day Iran, somewhere around there. That's the origins that they believe koi fish come from. And there have been a bunch of legends of where koi fish came from. One of the most prominent ones that I've read about dates back to about the 1800s, where the rice farmers would say that the carp that were in the rice paddies, some of them started to evolve and develop these vivid colors and these different patterns, and just from there they started selectively breeding them from there. Well, it turns out that this aquaculture, basically this idea of, like I mentioned before, selectively breeding these carp, goes back way further, and we're talking back to the Jiahu site in China, which is in Henan Province. So if you look at the Yellow River Valley here, there's a site called the Jiahu site, which is an early Neolithic site, which dates back 9,000 years ago. So about 7,000 BC are some of the earliest signs of human activity there. Coming up with the humans there was this idea of aquaculture. And we'll get into that in a second, but this idea of rearing koi fish goes back way earlier than the 1800s. And it started in China, allegedly, and spread all the way to Japan. Anyway, let's get into this. So this comes from the Max Planck Institute for the Science of Human History, just like a lot of research that's done in China does come out of, or it's conducted by Max Planck Institute. And the scientific article reads, Carp Aquaculture in Neolithic China dating back 8,000 years. Just a quick summary, these researchers analyzed fish bones excavated from Jiahu site in Henan Province, and then they compared the size, so the body length distributions, and species composition ratios of the bones from other East Asian sites, one of them being a later site in Japan. They found this evidence of managed carp aquaculture dating back about 6,200 to 5,700 BC. So again, this is what a modern koi fish looks like, and you can see it's very, very vivid, different. This one's spotted. This one has a lot more smaller spots. This one's more blotchy. So they've really got it down to the type of there are three main different types of koi fish. So it's down to a science now. But this was thought to be more of a modern aristocratic type of practice, but it goes back way further than any of that, starting with the farmers. The origins of aquaculture remain unknown. They don't know exactly when it started, but now they know that it goes back way further than you originally thought. The Shijing, which is a surviving collection of ancient Chinese pottery, and again, the Jiahu province is known for pre-writing or proto-writing and all these early human achievements that go back a long time ago. Again, in this area here, the Yellow River Valley is where a lot of stuff really happened early on in human history. So, and I find it just as an aside, I find it really interesting that the Yellow River Valleys tends to be the home of not only Homo sapiens but Homo erectus and Denisovans now, and who knows what it must have looked like pre-Ice Age. It must have been teeming with all kinds of different types of humanity. If I had to guess, just because of all the bones that we found there and all the organic matter that is associated with and the tools, of course, that are associated with these individuals back then. So the earliest. So this Shijing, this Chinese party that had some of the earliest writing, talks about carp being reared in a pond around 1140 BC. And then there are other historical records that describe carp being raised in artificial ponds and paddy fields in East Asia by the first millennium BC. So we get this 1,000 years before or before the Common Era. This date keeps coming up, but one thing that didn't make sense was, okay, so these fish are being raised in these paddy fields and these artificial ponds, but these paddy fields and artificial ponds go back way further. It dates back to the 5th millennium BC, according to all the latest research. So these researchers decided to see, okay, well, maybe carp aquaculture does go back that far as well. Let's see how far it goes back. So they go to the Jiahu, Henan, China site. Again, it's known for proto-writing, domestication of rice and pigs. I did an episode on the domestication of rice as well. And it's very interesting that I mentioned earlier in the video that carp, the koi, their genetics date back, or they trace back to Western Asia, and that's very interesting. There's this undeniable link between Persia or modern day Iran, Western Asia, the Caucasus and the steppe, and China. And I was not speculating, but I was talking about in a few videos back about this site in modern day Kazakhstan that was largely, the customs there have been largely unchanged for thousands and thousands of years. And when you think about the Silk Road, I was talking about that the Silk Road probably dates back further than we think, just because the tradition of people passing through that area probably was going on way before the official date. So, and the fact that they're this koi now that is a huge business. Their genetics date back to Western Asia, is right in the thick of the previous episodes I was talking about. This link between Western Asia, the steppe, modern day Kazakhstan, and well into China. Very interesting stuff. So I think this is another piece of the puzzle there, although not directly correlated, but it's still something to consider because, again, the geographical parallel that we see here. So the history of early development combined with archaeological findings at the area suggests that the presence of large expanses of water made by humans in the Jiahu site an ideal location for the present study, because again, we're talking about domesticated koi, we're talking about large-scale rice paddy farming, and that falls right into the perfect conditions for domesticating carp. Maybe not selectively breeding carp. I don't know how far you can take domestication, but anyway. And this site just so happens to have domesticated pigs and wheat, so a carp is not taking the principles of those and applying it to carp, freshwater fish, is not really a big jump. So here's what the researchers did. They measured 588 pharyngeal carp teeth just to find out how big all of these carp were. They wanted to measure the size. And then they took the fish remains from 3 separate Neolithic periods and combined the body length distributions from other sites with the modern sample of carp raised in Japan, modern day Japan. So the first 2 periods, they were unimodal patterns of body length distribution, peaking at near carp maturity, but the remains from the 3rd period, which dates 6200 to 5700 BC, displayed bimodal distribution. So the bimodal distribution is identifies more with the modern carp from Japan. So it's similar to that of documented at the Iron Age Asahi height. So this is a lot later, circa 400 to 100 AD, 400 BC to 100 AD, and is indicative of a managed system of carp aquaculture. So in other words, the size and shape of the carp from the period 3, 6200 BC site, their size is more correlated with a domesticated or selectively bred fish, as evidence from this much later Japanese site. So in such fisheries, a large number of cyprinids were caught during the spawning season and processed as preserved food, but at the same time, some carp were kept alive and released into confined, human-regulated waters where they spawned naturally and their offspring grew by feeding on available resources. Now, their analysis doesn't go so deep as to reveal whether or not they've mutated, but if you were to venture a guess, judging by some of the legends, like the legend, the story that I talked about kicking off this video, the 1800s story about where koi came from, maybe they were selectively breeding the carp that had certain patterns. Maybe some of them were just brown, like a normal carp, but then maybe the other ones that started to develop this pattern were selectively taken out and not processed and put into another pond just so they could spawn more of the same type of fish. It's very interesting stuff. As for why the koi fish would develop those spots, maybe it's just a sign of domestication. I know that when you domesticate foxes, after a few generations, their colors change. They turn white, or they get like white with black spots. It's a very interesting phenomenon that happens. So if it could happen to foxes, I don't see why it can't happen to a fish. In autumn, water was drained from ponds and the fish harvested, with body length distribution showing two peaks due to the presence of both immature and mature individuals. This high proportion of less prevalent fish indicates a cultural preference for common carp and the presence of aquaculture sophisticated enough to provide it. So that's basically where they came, where they know for sure. They don't know if koi came from Jiahu, the idea of aquaculture and all this stuff, but they know that it was present at Jiahu at the very least 6200 BC, or 8,200 years ago. That's a long time. And that's not that long after the Younger Dryas event either. So it's very, very interesting how that is going to play out in the future once more research comes out. So based on the analysis of the carp remains, the researchers hypothesized 3 stages of aquaculture development in prehistoric East Asia. So stage 1, humans fished the marshy areas where carp gathered during spawning season, and then stage 2, the marshy ecotones were managed by digging channels and controlling water levels and circulation so the carp could spawn. So basically creating this this aqua infrastructure. So they're basically planning their network, their aqua network. And then stage 3 involved constant human management, basically lording over what they had just built, and then taking spawning beds a step further, taking selection a step further. And then they're controlling reproduction and fish ponds or paddy fields to manage adolescence. So again, they're just separating out what they want, what they don't like, what's going to become food, and what's going to be kept for the next generation. The evolution of carp aquaculture with wet rice agriculture seems to be connected, and the co-evolution of the two is an important topic of future research. So as to the reason why they have koi, there's a ton of Chinese legends about koi itself. It's good luck. It's a gift from God. All of these different things. There's a religious aspect. There's a shamanistic aspect. There's a fortuitous or a fortune aspect, I guess, if you want to call it, a superstitious aspect to it. Anyway, so the fact is that humans were thinking about, if this is true, then humans were thinking about this a long time ago, well before that they thought even possible and capable of doing. Remember, this is supposed to be hunter-gatherer time. This is supposed to be humans didn't know anything about anything, and they had fire, and that was it, and very primal, very rudimentary fishing system and stuff. But now that's changing. Much like everything else in the scientific world and in academia now, they're looking back, slowly but surely, they're looking back on the people of this time as way more advanced than they thought. So anyway, let me know what you guys think. If you guys collect koi or have a koi pond and know more about some of the local legends or some of the more recent legends, let me know, and I'll talk to you guys later.